Good evening. Welcome to our weekly update on various topics on what actually happened here this week. And I guess the two most prevalent ones in the United States are the Supreme Court rulings we had, or decisions on gun rights and the ability to carry concealed weapons. And the other one would be whether or not a state has the right to decide to have abortions or not versus the personal liberties to decide your own personal freedom, basically, of decision making of whether or not to have an abortion or not. Well, and then we're going to have a update a little bit on the weapons. And then comes the really interesting part that's going to be on how the Russian Federation has been able to stage the avoid the default on their bond payments. And the very little publicity this actually has gotten. We know that the stock market had gone down all the way to the beginning of the week. And then by yesterday, when it was clear that this was going to be averted, it came out, and now the stock market went up. But no one noticed, and the media didn't report much on this. But first of all, let me just tell you one thing is with the gun thing is I'm not going to get into that. For those people outside the United States, it is probably primarily the ability that a person can carry a concealed weapon, that the state cannot rule this out, like New York had it for 100 years, and it was at the core of this entire decision was whether or not New York law was constitutional or not, and the judges found, 6 of them found, that that was in violation of the Second Amendment. So a person is entitled in New York State to carry a concealed weapon. Good. That's that. Now, for those people who are viewers who are outside the United States, is the ruling today of the Supreme Court was not whether or not the abortions are legal or illegal, or if abortion is a constitutional right. That is not the question. What they were weighing was what outweighs is the self-regulation of the state, of a state. We have 50 of them, and the right to make their own laws versus the individual rights to liberty. And here, the Roe versus Wade decision from the 1970s, I think it was 72, was somewhat flawed because it didn't properly evaluate this whole thing, and that was the opinion of the 6 justices. And so, even though Ginsburg dissented, she wrote in her own opinion, dissenting opinion, that she also found that Roe versus Wade was flawed basically to begin with. But what this now means is that the states, all 50 states, can, like they used to until 1972, make their own laws of whether or not they think that an abortion should be legal or illegal, or if they're going to have what form of abortions and at what point, and all of this stuff. This is now in full discretion of each state, and the women have no longer a say in that matter because it is a state law at this point. So now the country is split virtually. And the Democrats have already stated they're trying now to dismantle the Supreme Court. Well, they can't probably do this if they get 2/3 of the votes in the House and the Senate, and 3/4 of the states have to agree to this to disband and dissolve the Supreme Court. This is highly unlikely if they were trying to do that. So we will see what they're going to cook up, trying to impeach the justices, which is not really possible either in this case. So it's going to be that way. So you're going to have the Democratic states are going to be all-out abortion, pro-abortion, and everything else is going to be either no abortions at all or some abortions in particular circumstances. So it's going to be a three different situations here. And some people gonna move from one state and the other because they like that better or they like the other thing better. So that's basically where that is at. But the primary thing is the Supreme Court did not decide by itself whether or not a abortion is a constitutional right or not. They all said that is something the state needs to decide of whether or not that's a way to go with abortion or no abortions. That would be the correct interpretation here. Just for that. So, and on the Ukrainian front side, well, we had some movement there with the Pinzer movement from Izium down there in that whole little delta back. I forgot now the name of the town. I cannot pronounce it properly anyway. That industrial city they're fighting for. And it looks like it because of that river that goes through there, that little creek. They have problems getting enough supplies through. They're going to come now from the south side up, the Russians, and see how that goes. Oh, the good news is really that the Panzerhaubitze, the Panzerhaubitze 2000 has arrived in the Ukraine, 5 of them. And they have probably moved it by now to the front lines where they think they need it. And that will aid the Ukrainians in the firepower. The current artillery systems they're using, their range is about 18 to 30 kilometers on the Ukrainian side and up to 40 kilometers on the Russian side. And the problem with this is the old ammunition for those is 152 millimeter, if I'm not mistaken. The Western world uses 155 millimeters, so you cannot fire them in the old Soviet-style equipment. And if I understood that correctly, they have to set up a plant in the European Union to actually manufacture 152 millimeter because they had basically canned all of the stuff in the last 10 or 15 years because the Eastern European armies in those countries who belong to NATO had shifted already over to the newer weapons, to the Western weapons with 155 millimeters. So there is no current production facility up and running to make the old Soviet-style ammunition for those howitzers, the Soviet-style howitzers with 152 millimeter. And Romania now said they're going to, because they probably have some of the stuff left to manufacture that and the know-how, that they're going to set up a facility to make that for the Ukrainians so they can keep using their artillery. Because the Western ammunition, when it is a more intelligent type ammunition with the guidance systems and everything, is limited of what they can produce in a fairly short amount of time. There's limited production capabilities there. The NATO members can make regular ammunition up the gazoo, but they don't make any 152 millimeters for all the howitzers the Ukrainians have already inherited out of the Soviet days. So they are trying to work this out as quickly as they can so they can use them. But again, with the Soviet-style equipment, the Soviets came up with a modification to theirs, not the Soviets, the Russians, and they work a little bit better than the Ukrainians, which give them a range advantage of about 10 kilometers to 15 kilometers, depends on how they're positioned. And that is right now the slight advantage the Russian side has is their artillery, basically. It has really become an artillery war because in that delta back there, in that Luhansk region, that is not a good terrain for tank warfare, where you have wide open fields and you can really go at it. So they went with artillery, and that is the proper equipment to use in there. And that's why the Panzerhaubitze 2000 was so important, because of that extended range they have. That will help the Ukrainians to better attack the Russian artilleries further out, which they cannot reach with their regular Soviet-style artillery because of the range limitation they have. So that makes sense, and they could use probably a lot more, so we will see what they're going to do. Some people have said the Western European countries need to move ahead. These people are so daydreaming over there, the politicians. We have to understand one thing. This is not an excuse or to justify this, but this is just a very straightforward assessment of this. Is the most politicians in the Western world are daydreamers, and they hadn't been confronted with something like this, not even in their wildest dreams. So they have no concept of warfare, or the strategies behind war. They're relying on this, if any, what the military tells them, and then they have to make the decisions. But if you have no experience in this whatsoever, they won't be able to get their minds wrapped around this fast enough to actually catch up with the stuff. And this is part of the problem in this, in the party, in Germany, it's the Social Democratic Party. And then over here in the United States, too, with some of the Democrats and some of the Republicans. They like to deal with their pet projects, whatever they are. You see Biden over here. His pet project was the infrastructure bill he got in there, and whatever they want to do and that sort of stuff, and pro-abortion. That is now by far more important than any war in the Ukraine now for them. This is going to consume the Democrats over here with this abortion stuff. And so each country got their own thing going, and the green people in this day, or the more environmentally conscious people, they got the global warming on there. And the church people are worried that the people have no more food and all of that stuff because of the wheat that is affected by this out of the Ukraine. Interestingly enough, with the territory the Russians have already taken under their control at this point in the Luhansk region, all the way down there to Odessa, they have basically scooped up 30% of the grain production of the Ukraine, which will increase their world market share in grain production to 33% out of the chute. And it is clear that the Russian Federation and Putin is basically going to use grain in the future as a political weapon, so to speak. So if, especially towards the poor nations in Africa and other countries which depend on the wheat, he's going to stipulate this then in with political alignments and that sort of stuff. So this is going to be used as a weapon internationally by the Russians to get things turned into to increase their influence, their global influence, back into certain parts of the world where they had been absent for quite some time. Now, with that being said, I had to write this down because what we're going to talk about now is the avoidance of the default on the bonds, on the Russian issued bonds in euro and in US dollars. And there were two payments due. These are the so-called coupon payments. The way this normally works is, for viewers who are not familiar with bonds, government bonds is in the United States. You can buy a government bond. They come in $100 denominations, and they have a certain amount of time the government borrows the money on for the repayment, or until the principal has to be paid back. They're basically borrowing the money, and that could be as short as 1 month, or 3 months, or 6 months, or 9 months, or 12 months. And then you have 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. And that is basically the ranges they come in. Usually, as longer a bond runs, is higher the interest is which they're going to pay. And on average, say like on a 20 to 30 year bond, you're probably looking around 6%. So if you have $100, you're going to get a $6 payment for every $100 every year from the US government in form of a check from the Treasury. If you're the bondholder on record, that's how that works. And after the bond has basically reached maturity, then they're going to send you back your principal. That is 100% of what they borrowed. So you were able to get interest payments for all these years. Now, the Russians have done basically the same thing, and the country usually issues it in their own currency, which there's plenty of Russian ruble bonds out there, which are primarily sold in Russia to the Russian population, so they can put their money aside for retirement, and they have then the interest payments coming in, and that money is as good as gold. That's kind of the idea behind it. And in certain instances, the governments need to raise foreign or hard currency, in this case for Russia, primarily euro and US dollars. They want to, when they have to purchase things, the government, in these foreign currencies, and they want to finance projects over a longer time, they usually do this. And like I said in my other video, is that the bonds which were issued from the Russian government since the middle of 2014, I think it was after Crimea, but before the Donbas conflict started, and the Air Malaysia flight was shut down in 2014. That July, August timeframe, it was before then. I think it was after Crimea, but before that. That's when they decided that they put a clause in there, bonds, that if you do buy it or if you lend them the money, that they have the right to pay you in ruble for the coupon and the principal if there should be a need for this on their side. And we have actually reached this. So now the payments, there were only three news outlets which reported that yesterday. That was on the 23rd of June. That's when they were due. And these coupon payments. And they were in euro. The TASS said both of them were in euro. The Bloomberg said it was both in euro. And the Financial Times in England said it was both US dollars. Now, I looked up the bonds which were due yesterday to be paid with the coupons. This was the euro bond they have, which matures in 2027, and the US dollar bond, which matures in 2047. So one is a 10-year, the other one is a 30-year. And the interest payments on this, the face value on those is $200,000 for 1 euro bond, and 200,000 euros for 1 euro bond, and $100,000 for 1 US denominated bond. This is quite high. So their target with this was primarily institutional investors and people, high net worth individuals, which can easily buy this. That's why the US bonds are usually sold or issued in $100 increments, where this is now 100,000 and 200,000. So they're by far higher. They had a very specific group of people and institution in mind when they were issued, where this money was coming from. This could be foreign governments, but primarily it's the banking system itself, and endowment funds and that sort of stuff, trusts, large trusts, and then the what do you call them? It sucks when you get old. Well, when I think about it, I will let you know. Anyway, they're very high. So these two bonds were due. The European bond is labeled or issued as RUS 27 euro, RUS 27 EUR, and the US bond is RUS 47 US, RUS 47 US. The interest payment is 5.25% on the 30-year, and it was 4.25% on the 10-year. So there's a percent different. And they dished out yesterday a total, and that is not quite clear either in euro or US dollars, of 234.85 million euros / US dollars, which equated to 12.5 billion rubles, which were paid in ruble. And that gives you an exchange rate from €1 gives you 53.27 rubles. And that gives you a net effective interest because there's fees associated, the Russians impose and taxes on it. And that comes then down to 4.25% is net effect, is 3.56 per annum percent. So what they did now is the Russian Treasury basically sent the money over to the National Settlement Depository, that is the NSD in Moscow. And the NSD, if you're here in the United States, we have a similar institution that is called ACH. This is the automated clearinghouse. So when you write a check out and you mail a check to get paid, that goes through the automated clearinghouse, and that's the same thing. The way these clearinghouses or the settlement depositories interact is via SWIFT. And as we know now, the Russians their NSD got cut out of SWIFT, which means the NSD could not send anything over to ACH here in the United States. So if you had like a US bondholder, say like I would have invested in a $100,000 Russian bond for 5.25%, and I would be the owner of record, then this way this usually works is that I buy this at my bank, or I buy it through my online brokerage account, say like I had a Charles Schwab account or something, or a TD America or something like this. And usually the way this would go is this money would be sent from the NSD over to via ACH to Chase Morgan, JP Chase Morgan in New York. They're contracted, facilitator for that for the Russian government, and they would then distribute this money over to Charles Schwab, which then finally would credit my account with that interest at 5.25% on that 100,000 I have invested. Now, the U.S. government issued a waiver for the last payments until May. That they could be, that Chase Morgan was able to process them on the U.S. payments, and that waiver was not renewed. So now the U.S. payments were first of all not sent out in U.S. dollars, but in ruble, in the equivalent with an exchange rate of about 51 ruble to $1 US, and they're now held in an account at the NSD for me as the bondholder of record. Now, if I want to get this payment, I have to do two things. I have to go and get the certified here that I'm the bondholder of record, and I have to submit this to the NSD in Moscow, and I have to set up a ruble account in Moscow under my name, where they're going to transfer this in. This is in certain Russian banks. They have a agreement with the Russian government. So I could go there and they would then transfer that money in there. And then I'm subject to the conversion limitations to convert that into US dollars. To that then I should be able, through another Russian bank, which is still part of SWIFT, so I can move that money then over to my US account. That's how complicated this is. The problem is, on $100,000 investment, if say I just had $100,000, 5.25% is basically $5,250. I believe the annual currency conversion from ruble to US dollars at the moment for a non-US citizen is limited to $10,000 per year. So I would be lucky. I could get the $5,000 converted. I can then transfer that through another Russian bank here to the United States, and I will have the funds available in US dollars. Now, when that is going to mature and I'm going to get my $100,000 back, that $100,000 is going to be paid also in ruble, which would be then 100,000, 5 million some rubles. But with the 10,000 limit, I cannot convert that much ruble into US dollars because of the restrictions, which means that effectively my rubles are frozen in Russia. I cannot get them out. However, that bond does not mature until 2047, which means who knows, in 2047 everything might be hunky-dunky-dory again, and the Russians will actually pay them back in US dollars, so we don't know. With the Euro bonds, it's basically the same story, just that it goes again through a Russian bank, and then whoever is part of SWIFT can then transfer that into the European countries or whatever other countries there are. So this is how they avoided the default. This is what the Russians say. And the the rating agencies here in the United States, which evaluate credit risk of countries, have not made a statement or a declaration whether or not now Russia has in de facto defaulted. Because the question is now, it's like the same question, did they default by paying in ruble or not? And that is like the similar question you could have is when you say, did the hen come before the egg or the egg before the hen? This is like one of those things. So technically they have not defaulted, but I as an investor have now a heck of a time actually getting the payment for this from Moscow over to wherever I'm at on this planet into my bank account. It is no longer a matter of a day or two where it comes into the individual country's banking system and you get it credited into your investment account as cash balance. So does that constitute a default or not? No one knows. However, like I said, is only Bloomberg had that small of an announcement of this in there yesterday under tons of news. And, the Financial Times wasn't much better. It was a bigger headline over in Russia itself at TASS. They had it right on their front page, basically, that they were not defaulting. But the Western world has virtually taken not notice on it. It was swept under the carpet because if this would be evaluated or looked at as a default by Russia, the stock market yesterday, and especially today with being up by 800 points, would have completely tanked. I mean, that would have been one heck of a combination. The two rulings of the Supreme Court, Russia being looked at as a default, and then the stock market would have gone into bits and pieces, which it didn't. We will have to see on how the legalities in this. The market obviously was not worried about it, and well, again, with looking at the face values on those bonds being $100,000 and 200,000 euros, this is not your grandma and grandpa investor, buying 5,000 euros or $5,000 worth of Russian bonds to get 5.25% of interest. This is hedge funds. See, now hedge funds, institutions, other governments, those were the investors into this. They bought them up. And they can carry it in books. It has basically, they're going to convert this to the official rate here at 51 US dollars to 51 ruble to the US dollar, 53 rubles for the euro. And they have basically no losses sustained. They will account for that even though they can't do anything with the rubles, but they're going to have that in their books then as a ruble account, and with that the paperwork on the financial side is basically squared away, so no losses there. But is it a default? Is it not a default? This is something which probably courts are going to determine in time if investors starting to sue the Russian Federation over this or not. The rating, like I said, is the rating agencies have not really said much about it. They have basically said nothing at all. And it was, this whole thing was just swept under the carpet neatly and nicely and just like that, with two little tiny notes. And this is only insiders into this whole bond business would even know how to find the news on this stuff. And this is really what my channel is all about. If you want to have insider news, something which is not obvious, something which most people think belong to some concealed organizations which there's no transparency in there, it is then you might want to watch my channel. Here I will try to get the news you ordinarily would not get at the face value of this whole thing. Sometimes with my opinion, most of it just for what it is and how it was presented to us, with trying to sort through it with the truth is and what is not the truth. In this case, we looked at it. So we will see. And I don't want to mention it, but if you watch my other video, I think a few weeks ago, I mentioned this with the Supreme Court and the pending ruling, after the leak of this thing, for the Roe versus Wade, W-A-D-E, that's how that spells this, that automatic thing here YouTube has doesn't work all the time and cannot script it properly, and then I have to spell it out so when you use the closed captioning you can actually see it, and also in the transcript it will then be clear of what I said. I found that the best way, so that's why I sometimes spell words when I know that the scripting tool or the audio analyzer doesn't properly pick this up. Then I spell it out, and then you can read it, and you know what I meant, and then you can see what the machine made out of it, basically. Anyway, this is the things I wanted to share. With the military updates, I will see how this is going to develop. And then I'm still working on this, if you're waiting for this, with the Order of the Black Eagle, with our bylaws and the whole preface and preamble and all of that stuff, to get some clarity into this on what our order really was meant to be in the first place, and what the later generations then made out of it or turned it into or used it for. And there's some, principal discussions on how far the order has actually drifted away from the founder's ideology or ideas he had and what he wanted to see. And that's why I always say is there's things what we are and there's things what we're not. And a lot of times the order was looked at in public, viewed compared to what these people did at that time, where in reality the order itself, by its statutes and the preamble, had actually called for something else, that they kind of drifted away from the playbook there. And this is kind of the discussion I would like to have in my video, and I hope that's going to be then helpful to people, for the outside people, to understand that better, to bring some transparency in this. Not that people think that these orders are some mystical undertakings, where secretive meetings take place and whole countries were, kind of rearranged. And that's not the purpose of, at least not of the Order of the Black People. It never was. And so it was a order of merit with a humanitarian cause behind it. That was a big thing. It dealt primarily in the preamble, that was very important to him, is with widows and orphans, because back in those days a lot of people died early on and they left families. There were children with no parents or only with one parent, and it was a very difficult time, and these people needed support. And the Jewish organization, which kind of lives by that principle, is Kolel Shabbat in Israel, administered here in Brooklyn, in New York, by the Hasidic Jews. And that was their same principle, and that was their, this was before we had really medical treatment, and people, they just died of the common flu or the common cold or cholera and all these terrible diseases, and that was their social welfare net. And that is what Frederick really established, and that's something I want to put into the focus, because that was the main objective of the Order of the Black Eagle. And everything else what came later, the militarization in this and this, that, and the other thing, was not in our original idea or what this order was meant to be. And that is important to me to show this to people, that that's really what we wanted to do and what we were, what the goal was and the ideology and the motivation behind the order. And with that, you have a great evening and a great weekend. Thank you.